joyous and suffering beings everywhere. Well, good morning, everyone. So good to see you back after the break. We are, as you know, studying Swami Prabhavananda's collection of talks assembled by his very beloved devotee Nalini. Nalini recently passed away. You can read about that in the next edition of American Vedantist if you care to. Nalini, who she was and how she served. These are the collection of his talks given from 1938 to 1976. And she found the transcript of every one she could find. He gave the same talk many times. And so then she compiled them. She went through and found the best of each one of these talks and put them together as a narrative. And so we have the benefit of that great effort on her behalf. It's truly a treasure. So we'll start this morning with the talk, Stages of Spiritual Unfoldment. Stages of Spiritual Unfoldment. Now, when the Swami said the word unfoldment, he meant it quite literally. We are folded up, so to speak, underneath the burden of our upadhis or samskaras. And so as we remove the burden of that ignorance represented by the upadhis and samskaras, upadhis means self-descriptions or ways of thinking about the world and ourself. Of course, they may be more or less true, but they still are a description of relative reality in its lower forms, generally speaking. And so as we remove those, there is this natural unfoldment. And it is quite natural for us to do that. The first stage of spiritual unfoldment, though it seems very simple, is the most difficult to arrive at. It is to realize that all knowledge is within, that God is within. I'm going to repeat that because it's such a central idea to what he's going to say. Though it seems very simple, it is the most difficult to arrive at. It is to realize that all knowledge is within, that God is within. This is not merely what you read in books or what you believe, but it is an actual experience. That's what he means by realize. When you get this profound sense of the living presence, which is his first instruction for meditation. The chosen ideal is you yourself, no different. Learn to feel that living presence. That living presence is the knowledge and the God within. And so you actually experience that as you practice contemplation, concentration, and meditation. So it's not just what you read in books or what you believe, but it is an actual experience. As you close your eyes, even with the eyes open, you begin to feel a stir in your heart. You know God is there. That's what he means by the living presence. You begin to feel a stir in your heart. You know God is there. When you come to this first experience, something stirs up and you love to think of God. Something stirs up and you love to think of God. You find sweetness in it. Now, on Monday nights, we're reading and discussing a book, Love Poems from God. And it is a manifest example of exactly this. When you come to this first experience of sensing God within, something stirs up and you love to think of God. You find sweetness in it. Every religion talks of dispassion and renunciation. But in my opinion, now when the Swami says, in my opinion, this is the opinion of a realized soul. This is not just a learned man. Every religion talks of dispassion and renunciation. But in my opinion, it is not something that is forcibly done. In other words, pushing away or letting go, dispassion and renunciation. Every religion talks of dispassion and renunciation, but in my opinion, it is not something that is forcibly done. You do it because you find something greater, sweeter than the senses can give. So the Swami is saying, it's the carrot, not the stick. You find something sweeter and you're drawn to that. And he said, once you sense that brilliant light in the East, and you're living in the West, naturally you're drawn to that light, that brilliant, attractive light in the East, the light of life and life everlasting, if you will. And so you automatically leave behind the things of the West as you move toward that's what he's characterizing now as something greater, sweeter than the senses can give. And senses are the things of the West. So that's the first stage. When you discover this feeling of love and reverence, and you understand that there's something there in your heart. In the second stage, cravings become less and less. Notice he doesn't say as an act of will. He just says in the second stage, cravings become less and less. They become saltless. They have lost their flavor. When you found something greater than what the senses offer, then it is spontaneously true that the things of the senses, the cravings, become tasteless, saltless. They have lost their flavor. So notice how quickly he summarizes the second stage. You just find yourself less and less drawn to the things of the senses. In the third stage, your ego becomes humble. My master, and by my master he means Swami Brahmananda, the spiritual son of Sri Ramakrishna and Holy Mother. My master often used to quote this verse of the chant of Sri Chaitanya. Be humbler than a blade of grass. Be patient and forbearing like the tree. Take no honor to thyself. Give honor to all. chant unceasingly the name of the Lord. Now, these are Chaitanya's first instructions. They follow the devotee's confession. How huge is my wretchedness, who find in this empty life and heart no devotion to thy name. And so this is that humility, that how huge is my wretchedness, who find in this empty life and heart no devotion to thy name. My master often used to quote this verse of the chant of Sri Chaitanya, be humbler than a blade of grass. These are Chaitanya's first instructions. Be humbler than a blade of grass. Be patient and forbearing like the tree. Take no honor to thyself. Give honor to all. Chant unceasingly the name of the Lord. In the Upanishads, it is said, what is the nature of a man of God? He becomes humble and does not assert himself. So Chaitanya was simply elaborating that thought, saying, what does that mean specifically? What is the nature of a person of God? That person becomes humble and does not assert themselves. The fourth stage is poise and tranquility, absence of pain. As Sri Krishna says in the Gita, yoga, union with me and detachment from the things of the senses. Yoga means both those things, union with the divine and detachment from the lesser truth of material existence. Sri Krishna says yoga is the breaking of contact with pain. So the Swami says the fourth stage is poise and tranquility, absence of pain. Nothing can disturb your equilibrium. In the midst of the opposites, happiness and misery, there will be a balance. If you hold to a pillar, you hold one hand on a pillar, you can spin round and round and you will not fall. That pillar is the pillar of God. And this is one of the things that he just picks up this metaphor from Sri Ramakrishna. Sri Ramakrishna says, first know that there is that pillar, that reliable, unmoving, unchanging pillar. Hold to that with one hand. And then Sri Ramakrishna says, dance around it for all you're worth. If you hold to a pillar, you can spin round and round and you will not fall. That pillar is the pillar of God. Live in the world, move among the objects of the senses, but have no attachment or aversion to them. Jesus' shortest instruction in the Gospel of Thomas is be passers-by. Be passers-by. And it's exactly what the Swami is talking about here. Live in the world, move among the objects of the senses, but have no attachment or aversion to them. Just pass them by. In the Gita, yoga is defined as the breaking of contact with pain. In the fifth stage, God becomes the only reality. Now notice what we've been talking about here is fewer and fewer burdens on the truth that exists within you. fewer and fewer things heaped on top of it that mask it, that make it difficult for you to access. The things of the senses have gone away. Happiness and misery and attachment has gone away. All of these things have gone away as you progress in spiritual life. So now at the fifth stage, the Swami says, in the fifth stage, God becomes the only reality, and the world appears as a shadow. If you remember Swami Sridharananda, this has been quoted to us a number of times from something he said to us on the phone one day. He said, in the beginning, we see and we believe for good reason, I am. In what the Swami has characterized as the second stage, where we have this sense of the reality of something within us, the Swami Sridharananda says, then we say, I am, and he or she is, God or goddess. I am, and he or she is. In the next stage, you say, he or she is, and I am. That's what we're talking about here. God is, this is the fifth stage in Swami Prabhavananda's formulation here, but it's the third phase in Swami Sridharananda. You say, he or she is, and I am. Then finally, only he or she is. And the Swami says, in that stage, God becomes the only reality, and the world appears as a shadow. Swami Vivekananda characterized it as a dream. Nisargadatta Maharaj characterized it as a fog bank. You're living in a fog bank. Things are dim, and the things of the world are dim and hard to focus on. Living in a fog, he said. Here the Swami characterized it as the world appears as a shadow. In the fifth stage, God becomes the only reality, and the world appears as a shadow. The whole view of life changes. Instead of seeing the physical aspect of something, you see the Brahman inside. Now, you may recall that in the Great Forest Upanishad, Yajnavalkya, in talking to his wife Maitreyi, she asks him the question, what is it that you know that gives you the freedom to do what you're doing, which is leaving the world of things behind? And he says, my dear, it is not for the sake of the husband that the wife loves the husband. It is for the sake of the self. It is not for the sake of the wife that the husband loves the wife. It is for the sake of the self. This is brought up simply to give you an idea what the Swami means here. You see Brahman inside. When we love someone or something, whether we know it as an experience of Brahman, that's why we love it. That's what Yajnavalkya is saying. Instead of seeing the physical aspect of something, you see the Brahman inside. So first we sense it, and therefore we're drawn to it, we love it. later, in this stage that the Swami is talking about, you actually see it. The physical aspect becomes as a shadow, and the self or Brahman becomes the reality that you see. You learn to really love. You learn to really love because you are loving God in the husband, in the wife, in children. And the Swami is just referring here to the series of things that Yajnavalkya speaks about in that I referred to. He goes through this same series. You learn to really love because you are loving God in the husband, in the wife, in children, in parents, in every being. Now, Swami doesn't mean just every living or animate being. He means everything that has existence. Brahman does not exist. Brahman is existence itself. So, therefore, everything that partakes of existence is necessarily Brahman. So, the inanimate as well as the animate, everything that has being is Brahman. You learn to really love because you are loving God in the husband, in the wife, in children, in parents, in every being. Then in natural sequence, the sixth state, samadhi, follows. Now notice that Swami says, then in natural sequence, the sixth stage, samadhi, follows. What he's gesturing to is that it's no longer a matter of self-effort. You have made self-effort up through the fourth and into this fifth stage. But then when you begin to see the divine in everything, as Patanjali says, something happens to you. You experience samadhi. So that's what the Swami means when in natural sequence, it just naturally happens that you, in focusing on the divine in meditation or contemplation or in prayer, you slip into samadhi. Then in natural sequence, the sixth stage, samadhi, follows. The mind and nature have ended their services. Now, if you want to know what the Swami means by that in detail, read the last 4 pages of Swami Vivekananda's book, Raja Yoga. He talks about what's meant by the mind and nature, which are the products of the gunas. The mind and nature have ended their services. And so they dissolve as far as you're concerned. They no longer bind you. You're no longer a slave, as we were studying on Wednesday night. You're no longer enslaved by the gunas. You are free. You are independent. In Sanskrit, according to Patanjali's use of the word, you are kaivalya. Nature's 2 objectives are to give us enjoyment and to give us liberation. This is a direct quote from the Devi Mahatmyam. This is what is said of the Divine Mother in the Devi Mahatmyam. The 2 objectives of nature, nature is mother, mother is nature. Nature's 2 objectives are to give us enjoyment and to give us liberation. When nature has finished her job, immediate with samadhi, Karmas and the effects of karmas are burned. So I'm going to read this again. Then in natural sequence, the sixth stage, samadhi, follows. The mind and nature have ended their services. We turn back. Nature's two objectives are to give us enjoyment and to give us liberation. When nature has finished her job, immediate with samadhi, in other words, when you have this samadhi, and he's talking about savikalpa samadhi, he's not talking about nirvikalpa. He's talking about something that you still experience. Karmas and the effects of karmas are burned. And now he goes on to the seventh stage. The seventh stage is liberation, kaivalya, and savikalpa samadhi. The practice of savikalpa samadhi brings you to nirvikalpa samadhi. Again, it's not something that you've done willfully. It is a natural progression. In the seventh and last stage, you taste the bliss of living as a free soul. Then you dedicate yourself to the service of God in mankind. I think that's a good place to stop and ask for, according to this, it's 11:30 almost. So it's a good place to stop because he's about to recap. He's about to start again at the first stage. So anything at all in the way of comments or questions about what we've read and discussed so far? Anything at all. This is where we practice the art of spirituality together and share with one another who we are.
Shankaraji.
Yes, Balakrishna.
It is such a wonderful teaching. Swamiji put everything in a platter with 7 ideas, 7 food.
Yes.
And the first one is so, is so important because this is where your intellect transforms into a different thought of, different change, in a change of thought, your thought mode, which gives you an automatically that the feeling of dispassion. I think this is such a wonderful platter for me.
Yes, this is what's meant by the mature ego, the ripe ego. This is it is not that we become egoless. It is that the ahamkara is purely expressed rather than this expression of separation. And so you're right, Balakrishna. It is really a wonderful, wonderful platter that the Swami has laid out before us. Thank you. Anyone else?
Brother Shankara, this is Haima.
Yes, Haima.
I truly agree with him. I was going to say the same thing. I thought this page should be the page so that people would understand the rest of the whole thing about spirituality. It's really amazing. This has really put it in a nutshell, everything, the essence of spirituality, how to reach realizing self in the Brahman.
Mm-hmm.
It's a great chapter. Thank you so much. Excellent.
It is a beauty. You're right. The stages of spiritual unfoldment.
Definitely. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Haima, for that remark, for those remarks. Anyone else? Any questions or comments?
Brother Shankara, again, echoing everybody else, it's such a beautiful process that has been laid out.
Yes.
My question was, has science or logic attempted to explain how the karma is burnt when one reaches Nirvikalpa Samadhi, or is that something that's because of the experience of the sages and we take it on faith?
Well, Nirvikalpa Samadhi can only be said as words. It is beyond all conceptualization. It is beyond thought and speech. This is what Jesus was speaking of when he said, the peace that passeth all understanding. There's no way to, a person who's in Nirvikalpa Samadhi appears to be dead. There is no heartbeat. There is no pupillary response. They're not breathing. When Sri Sarada Devi began to live with the master in his room, in the early time that she came from Jairambati to live with him and serve him, and she still, for those months, lived with him in his room, he would go into that samadhi, the Nirvikalpa Samadhi, which was now just a natural state for him. And she would be terrified. She thought he was dead. She would think he was dead. And when he became aware of that, that's when he arranged for her to go live in the Nahabat. So science cannot begin to explain how someone can appear to be dead and yet return from that state and be utterly unable to say what happened because there is no experiencer there. This is what's so hard for us to grasp, Swayam, and it is natural for us to be very difficult for us to grasp. We have never been in a state where we weren't experiencing. Have we? Never. Whatever it is that is occurring, we're experiencing it. And this is true of even Savikalpa Samadhi. There's still an experiencer, an experienced, and the experiencing. So it's still in the realm of duality. Science has nothing to say about the realm of non-duality. Even quantum physics, it's a very, very different form of duality, but it's still duality.
Thank you, Brother Shankara.
Mm-hmm. It was a very good question. Nirvikalpa Samadhi can only be realized. We can't say that people experience it because there's no experiencer. Sri Ramakrishna literally came to tears. His disciples, these young boys that were about to become the monks, at his passing, they became the monks. He was training them over a 4 or 5 year period, and they asked him to try and tell them, what is this Nirvikalpa Samadhi? What happens to you when you get like that? And he tried to tell them, and he came to tears. Sri Ramakrishna was simple-hearted and very straightforward and very honest. So he tried to tell them. And as articulate as he could be in this humble village Bengali that he used, there was no way for him to say. And according to the story told in The Divine Player, The Great Master, those 2 translations of Saradananda's book, the master came to tears trying to tell these boys. In frustration. The tears were tears of frustration. Thank you. Anything else from anyone?
Yes. Hi. Thank you, brother. This is Michaela Cachet.
Hello,
and
Michaela.
Hi. Thank you for the class.
Yes.
And I, isn't it, since it took years to tell the young, you could say disciples or students, wouldn't you say that what he's saying is that it's a gentle process of climbing up the ladder, and that we can't, as we're on each rung of the ladder, you can't see beyond that rung that you're on, because the fear is so great that we have to let go of that fear. It's a gentle process, and you can only step outside and view the dream reality. And you could say, taking like Ramakrishna's hand and viewing it then, and then you realize that it's a dream reality, that you're outside of it, and it's a gentle process.
It is indeed, and I really applaud your use of the word gentle. It is indeed a gentle process. It cannot be rushed or forced. And it happens in its own good time for each of us. The thing that we have to do is be persistent. I said Swami Prabhavananda's first instruction for meditation is that the divine presence, the divine being, the so-called chosen ideal, the chosen ideal is you yourself, no different. Learn to feel that living presence. The second instruction is patience. The third instruction is perseverance.
Aren't those the fruits of the Spirit?
Yes, they are the fruits of the Spirit, but they come to us quite naturally as we move in that direction.
Correct. So that's the gentle process.
Yes. But we must be perseverant. We must keep it. We must do it. This is what I'm going to talk about tomorrow morning, about practice. What is it to practice? And, it is something that it's just like anything else. As Swami Vivekananda said, education is the training of the nerves. If you were to set out, Michaela, at this point, if you were to set out to become a tennis champion or a chess champion, whatever suited your temperament and capabilities, whatever you might want to excel at, you would know perfectly well that you couldn't rush it. You'd only hurt yourself. You'd need a good teacher, and you'd need to practice regularly. Because if you're going to get good at something, you can't do it just by practicing once or twice a week. It won't work.
No, it's a constant process, and it's almost to me like a dance. Like you take a step.
Yes.
And then,
very good. That's a metaphor very much used by the great poet Hafiz, dancing. Of course, he was a Sufi, and they have their dance. But he put it in even broader terms. So yes, we do dance. As a matter of fact, very appropriately, Sri Ramakrishna has the metaphor that as you excel, you become like an expert dancer. So you don't have to worry about right and wrong. He says, you become as an expert dancer, you cannot put a foot wrong. It isn't that you do wrong things, you don't. You may do things that other people don't understand. That's true of holy people. But you won't you can't put a foot wrong. So yes, it is a dance. Thank you, Michaela.
Thank you.
Anybody else before we go on?
Shankaraji,
Yes, Balakrishna.
regarding the karma and these things, and because Vivek Chudamani explains it so good, and they compare the whole thing to the deep sleep state. When you have in the deep sleep state, the ego goes into potential form, and that's why you don't have the consciousness of the body. So you lose the consciousness of the body. And this is the same thing that happens in the Savikalpa Samadhi, where you lose the body consciousness.
Yes.
The minute you lose the body consciousness, there is no karma, because the karma is all to fructify the things that are, the body acts as to fructify the karmas. That's why in Savikalpa Samadhi, just like in the sleep, you lose the consciousness of the body, and then the karma becomes a roasted seeds.
Yes, yes, exactly. And as you practice meditation, you will lose this consciousness of the body even before there is Savikalpa Samadhi. You will be immersed in meditation, and it won't yet be that experience where everything else is pushed to the periphery and there is only the divine presence. But you will lose your body awareness. And as a matter of fact, for brief periods, up to some minutes even, you will stop breathing. You still have a heart rate, and there would still be a pupillary response, but you will stop breathing. Breathing is associated with thought, which is associated, as you correctly pointed out, with karmas. So yes, you're absolutely right. And it is, and Shankara does explain it extremely well in the Vivekachudamani. That is a wonderful workbook to read. Anything else? Okay, well, we'll go on. Let's see what time it is. It is, oh goodness, it's 11:44, it says here. Okay, so we've got just about 15 minutes. So Swami is now going to go back and recap. As you begin to feel the presence, something stirs within you, and you actually feel it. It is actually a sensory experience. As you begin to feel the presence, the living presence, something stirs within you. Hindu psychologists and yogis explain it as the rising of the Kundalini, the divine energy. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar with the Kundalini resides in its somnolent state, its sleeping state, at the base of the spine, in the first spiritual center, the Muladhara. When you begin to practice spiritual disciplines, as given to you by a guru or you find in a book and you practice regularly, this energy is invited, literally invited up the spiritual channel, which is a psychic or metaphysical parallel to this physical spine called the Sushumna. And so the Kundalini rises. And when it rises to the heart center, this is when that feeling of something stirring within you comes. Hindu psychologists and yogis explain it as the rising of the Kundalini, the divine energy. By that is meant that the Kundalini is the distillation of that which is causing you to be manifest. There comes great joy. And at the same time, and this, please hear this, there comes great joy, and at the same time, an ache in your heart. You feel that ache because you have not yet seen him, and you want to see him. And if you read the testimony of the saints in Love Poems from God and elsewhere, the testimony of these great saints from around the world, you'll see that this ache becomes, Sri Ramakrishna says, it's like having your head pushed underwater until you think you're going to suffocate. And then when you're released up and you're asked how you felt, you say, I was dying for a breath of air. Well, this is the feeling that comes. I'm dying for the experience of the divine. You feel that ache because you have not yet seen him and you want to see him. Then comes greater earnestness. The Sanskrit word is mumukshutvam. It means great yearning, great zeal. It powers you forward. Then comes greater earnestness, mumukshutvam. You feel him very near, yet you feel frustrated. There is such inner joy and at the same time an ache. It is a peculiar experience, but wonderful. Well, some days it's wonderful. Some days it's just an almost unendurable ache. There is such inner joy and at the same time an ache. It is a peculiar experience, but wonderful. Then you find that cravings for sense objects, then you find as this ache and this desire for the divine experience grows and grows, then you find that cravings for sense objects become less and less. Things that used to give you pleasure no longer do. This may include friends. And so some people may naturally fall away in your life. They may not be happy with this. But their company no longer gives you pleasure. The way they are, so to speak, drags you down. And so you find that you're not desiring to spend time with them. This is difficult, but it's one of the things that spontaneously happens. Things that used to give you pleasure no longer do. But you get a higher pleasure, and craving lessens as your ego becomes less and less assertive. So I'm going to go over that summary again, because this is the Swami winding it up. As you begin to feel the presence, which comes as the result of spiritual practice, as you begin to feel the presence, something stirs within you. Hindu psychologists and yogis explain it as the rising of the Kundalini. Which spontaneously happens. There are practices of Kundalini yoga where you work at it deliberately. The Ramakrishna order Swamis discourage this. They say, no, chant the name of the Lord, focus on the divine presence in your heart, and it invites the Kundalini to rise rather than forcing it. If you want to know about these practices of pushing the Kundalini up the Sushumna, you can look up Swami Vivekananda's 6 lessons on Raja Yoga. But you'll notice that in that very document, he says, don't do this on your own. Do this, if you're going to do it at all, do it only under the guidance of a qualified teacher, and a really qualified teacher. The reason is you can harm your nervous system, including your brain. You can even have a stroke. So this rising of the Kundalini is something that happens naturally when you do these other kinds of spiritual practices that invite it to rise. Hindu psychologists and yogis explain it as the rising of the Kundalini, the divine energy. There comes great joy, and at the same time, an ache in your heart. You feel that ache because you have not yet seen him and you want to see him. Then comes greater earnestness, mumukshutvam. You feel him very near, yet you feel frustrated. There is such inner joy, and at the same time, an ache. It is a peculiar experience, but wonderful. Then you find that craving for sense objects becomes less and less. Things that used to give you pleasure no longer do. But you get a higher pleasure, and craving lessens as your ego becomes less and less assertive. This is the ripe or mature ego. As Sri Ramakrishna said, the unripe ego is like a sharp metal sword. The mature ego is like a sword of gold. It won't hold an edge. Gold won't hold an edge like steel will. So it can't hurt anyone. This is what's meant by less assertive. So in the few minutes we have left, any further comments or questions?
Comment, Brother Shankara. Haima again. Sorry.
Yes, I'm a dear.
It's not only Hindu psychologists. I think it's, I would say, worldwide. Psychologists and therapists do this when they try to get the clients to get the self-realization. That is where knowing the self, even therapy, knowing the self is so important as in spirituality. They are almost so similar.
Very good. Thank you, dear. Yes.
Yeah.
The process
Yes.
is 3. First, self-discovery.
Self-discovery, self-love.
Then self-actualization.
Exactly.
Then self-realization.
Definitely.
First, we discover the self, and we find that it's far more than we ever knew it was.
That's right.
And this is where therapists and psychiatrists and psychologists can help us.
Yes.
They help us discover the self. And then they help us with self-actualization.
Actualization.
Past that, even a spiritual teacher, they've done their job.
Yes.
And you go on to self-realization on your own. As they say, your mind becomes your guru. Your own mind becomes your guru. But you're absolutely right. And therapists, good therapists, are tremendously helpful in helping us undo the knots of the heart.
Yes.
Untie the knots of the heart that are these samskaras, these past life experiences, or however you want to call them, whether it was past life 5 minutes ago or past life 5 lifetimes ago, we don't know. But nevertheless, something is binding us at the heart.
Mm-hmm.
And,
it's a releasing of that tension, everything.
yes.
Flushes out and people cry, and just like they cry in a spiritual center or a temple, it's the same thing, almost very similar.
Yes.
Shankaraji,
Yes, Balakrishna.
I have a question.
Please.
This is that when we are talking about the therapist, is this the same self they are addressing? What Upanishad says? Is this because the self they are talking about is mostly the ego and the mind? Am I right or wrong? I don't know.
Balakrishna ji, as Swami Brahmananda pointed out to Swami Prabhavananda when he was still just a boy, a brahmachari, Swami Prabhavananda was asserting that the divine was not available to us in a physical sense. And he was speaking to arguing with some other boy and just outside Brahmananda's room. Brahmananda overheard him and came out and said this, "Oh, I see," he said it in English, "Oh, I see you have become omniscient. Show me the line of demarcation where the world of matter ends and the world of spirit begins." So it's a spectrum, Balakrishna. It's the lower ego and the higher ego, the lower self, the higher self. It's a spectrum. And so it can't be compartmentalized in the way that your question suggests.
No, but what I meant was, see, Brahmananda and Prabhupada, they have all the knowledge. That's why when they are talking, show me the demarcation between the, spirit and the matter, they are talking at a different level. But when we go to a therapist, we don't have all that knowledge. So that is that is where I'm trying to understand.
If what happens, as Haima was saying, if what happens is that you have knots of the heart based on your samskaras, they may not call them samskaras, they have their own language for these things. But nevertheless, what they're doing is helping you untie the knots of your heart, the things that are binding you and keeping you from seeing clearly. First, we have to, as Swami Ranganathananda points out so beautifully in Divine Grace, his book Divine Grace, you must first have a healthy, mature, unripe ego before you can go on to develop a ripe ego. And this is what the therapist helps you to do, is have a healthy, mature, stable, centered, unripe ego. And for those who are unassertive, they will help them become properly assertive. For those who are too assertive, they will help them moderate that assertiveness. They will help them become more poised and centered. So what happened? This is what I'm saying. There is no line of demarcation. And Prabhavananda at that time, when he was arguing with that other boy outside of Brahmananda's window, did not have knowledge by his own testimony. You can read it in that book about him. I've forgotten the title now. Something.
Divine Grace?
No, it's a book about Swami Prabhavananda. We have it in the bookshop. It was compiled by his right-hand person, Ananda Prana. In any event, it is absolutely necessary to have a healthy, unripe ego. And if you read the first 2 chapters, the first 2 sections of Divine Grace, you'll see exactly what I mean. The Swami says you cannot go beyond and progress in spiritual life with an unhealthy ego. And so therapists help us establish a healthy, unripe ego. A ripe ego.
Brother Shank,
Yes, please.
is it A Light to the West, the book?
Say it again, please.
Is it A Light to the West?
A
the book
Light
you
to
were
the
looking
West.
for?
Thank you, Katz. That's exactly.
Sorry to interrupt you.
No. I'm glad you did. That's it. Perfect. The book that I was referring to is a biography of Swami Prabhavananda called A Light to the West, and it's a compilation of things that are not elsewhere published by his disciple and right-hand person, a nun that served him from the 1940s until he passed away in 1976. So she was with him for almost 30 years and collected all these things. And after his death, she published them first privately and then later the order. Brahmaprana, the nun who's in charge of the Dallas Center, took charge of the manuscript and it was published by the order as this book, A Light to the West. Thank you, Katz.
You're welcome.
Anything else?
Hey, Brother Shankara.
Yes.
Hey, how's it going?
Hello, Liam.
Great. Hey, it's Liam here. Yeah, it's great to be back. And,
Great to have you back.
Yes, and so I just had a comment and then a comment question hybrid that was sparked from the last comment and question. Well, the first was the comment was I practice meditation with a friend who's he's primarily known as a meditation instructor, but he's also has a in-depth background as a psychotherapist. And one thing that I have noticed a lot during the group sessions is that people would ask during the question and answer segment, people would ask like, oh, I have these feelings of anger towards so and so, and how long do I have to practice this meditation practice until it goes away? And he always kindly has to remind everyone. He's like, well, that's not really how it works, right? It's like, then he discusses how the psychology part is equally important to the meditation, because I know I've fallen into this pitfall, and I maybe I'm projecting it onto other people, but there's kind of this stigma that if we just sit and meditate 8 hours a day, that all of our problems will go away. And from my experience, that's not how it's worked for me.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not.
Yeah.
They will not. As long as the knots of the heart are there, this business that you mentioned, and this is one of the big obstacles, is anger. Anger towards someone, towards some circumstance, toward something in the world. That has to be resolved before you're able to progress. I'll give you the example of a monk in Southern California. He was a very successful monk in many ways. He had a very important position, did a lot of work, and so on. And yet he was a pain in the ass. He would, and it was universally recognized. Finally, he fell under the sway of Swami Sridharananda, this wonderful monk, self-realized, is a realized soul, everyone agrees, and began to spend time with him in Australia. And I don't know, no one knows what the Swami said to him, but somehow or another, and it wasn't just spiritual instruction, I guarantee you it was something of a psychological nature, because he was able to release that anger and he was able to become transformed. And now he's easy to get along with and a joy to be with on the phone. That's the way I experience him now. I haven't seen him in person for a lot of years. But these psychological issues, as long as they persist, they are an impediment. They are a fetter. So thank you for bringing that up. Anything more?
Yes. So yeah, kind of on a similar note, and kind of based on this, because I have to confess I wasn't 100% clear on what I think Balakrishna was asking, but this idea came up as you were talking about this idea of like knowledge or not knowing.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, because I've read a little bit of Swami Vivekananda's writing on karma yoga,
Mm-hmm.
and he states something in there along the lines of, you know, everything that is known is within the human mind or in the mind, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that it's not so much, you know, what we call learning, like, because like learning to me signifies like, okay, I didn't know, and now I know, like it came from outside and inside. But from what I interpreted in his writing there, it was that it's not so much like we already know it. It's just like, as you said, like covered, like when covered by knots. And it's like what we call learning is just more of a process of revealing something that was already there, rather than like acquiring the, you know, something that was outside of us. And I was just wondering if that is how that kind of corresponds to what you were just
Absolutely. You nailed it, Liam. Swami Vivekananda said, education is nothing more than the revelation, the manifestation of the perfection already within.
Mm-hmm.
Religion is nothing more than the revelation or manifestation of the divinity already within. And he says, and you just nailed it. It doesn't come from outside. It comes from inside. And a therapist like Haima can tell you, they don't tell their client anything. They allow their client to see something that already exists within them, that was masked from them by their obsession about it or by their denial of it, or however it works. And so therapy can be a tremendous benefit to the spiritual aspirant. And as I say, if you want the rationale for it, just read the first two sections of Swami Ranganathananda's book, Divine Grace. He says you must have a healthy ego, and by that he means unripe ego, a healthy human ego. You have to be balanced, you know. You have to know how to take care of yourself, and you have to know how to play the game of life. Then you can tackle spirituality. As Swami Vivekananda put it, first bread, then football, then the Gita. You know, first bread, learning to take care of yourself and not being assailed by constant worries of poverty. First bread, then football. And he used that as a metaphor for the game of life, because it's such a complex and frustrating and demanding game. First bread, then football, then the Gita. And so though Swami Ranganathananda doesn't mention that little formulation, the first couple of maybe even 3 or 4 sections in there parallel it exactly. First, you learn to be a healthy human being. Then you learn to play the game of life successfully. Then you find out there's another dimension to yourself.
You said it so correctly, Brother Shankara. There's a knowledge in every person, but it's buried underneath.
Yes.
A psychologist or a therapist removes the layers. Let them remove those layers.
Yes. And they have to do it. As you know, as a therapist, they have to do it. You can't do it for them.
We cannot. We can only show the way. That's all. And then they have to learn to walk that path and then find their self.
And in the scriptures, these psychological problems that we have are called knots of the heart.
Knots, exactly.
K-N-O-T-S, knots of the heart.
Yes.
And they are a limitation.
Yes.
And until they are untied, until their power over us is lost, we are limited.
You don't liberate yourself. That's where this is, anger management, emotional regulation.
And this is, if you want to see a good formulation for how to do this essentially for yourself.
Yes.
If you want to do it without a therapist and you're willing to do the work, then just follow very carefully and very closely Patanjali's instructions about yama, niyama, asana, pranayama. If you do those things, particularly the first 2, the yamas and niyamas, which are all about cleaning up your act. And of course, that's what a therapist helps us do. A psychologist or therapist helps us clean up our act. Get out from behind that which we have learned that is not true, but nevertheless, we have those glasses on. It looks like it's true to us. And so we keep projecting it out into the world and finding it. As Goethe said it, Goethe had this way of summarizing. He spoke in this with the male pronoun, but please don't be put off by that. A man sees in the world what he carries in his heart. A man sees in the world what he carries in his heart. And if you're carrying a load of knots in your heart, you're going to see those knots everywhere you look. There's just no 2 ways about it. So I suspect it's well past noon. So unless there's something else, and if there is something else, we should deal with it. And anybody who has to go, please feel free to go.
Brother Shankara?
Yes, dear.
I'm trying to verbalize what's in my head, and I don't know how it's going to come out. But I think a combination of everything is what I guess helps one grow. I'm not a therapist and I haven't been to one, so I don't know exactly what they do, but I feel like unless there is the highest goal that the spiritual teaching offers, sometimes I don't know if the therapy alone can help one, because it becomes limited. I mean, some of the psychological processes are, I guess, reductionist or whatever, and can still keep you, I mean, it may definitely help untie some knots, but unless there's this bigger picture, bigger goal of what the spiritual teaching offers, it's still hard to get out of that.
All I can suggest,
Yeah,
Swayam, is that you read the first two sections of Divine Grace
right.
and then read them again until you feel like you've truly assimilated what it is that the Swami is saying.
Right.
We have to have a healthy human ego
Right.
in order to live a life that enables us to go beyond. If we're being mastered by life, so it's not a question of whether therapy's good, right, wrong, all that. You know, there is within the Hindu community. There is within the Hindu community, and I have now been doing this for almost 11 years now. And I saw it even before. There is a bias against therapy, that somehow it betrays a weakness. Nonsense. Swami Prabhavananda would say to some people who came to him for spiritual instruction, I cannot be of any help to you because you're too psychologically confused. I suggest you go get therapy. And then if you feel like it, after you're feeling more balanced, come back and we'll take it from there.
Brother Shankara?
Yes, dear. Yes, who
Brother
is this?
Shankara?
Yes, Neera.
Yes. Does it help, of course, if the therapist is also leaning towards spiritual inclination? You know, that will help you even more because.
Well, yes, of course. If you can find a therapist
Yes,
that's spiritually
my
inclined.
point was, depends on the therapist if they're also spiritually inclined to heal better and faster also.
Neera, I'm very sorry to say this, but you're breaking up. So we're only hearing about half of what you're saying. I don't know why it's happening, but there seems to be some feedback or something that is causing your what you're saying to break up. But I think I understood what you're saying, that if it's best to have a therapist that is spiritually inclined. Yes, one of the devotees of this place is Jim Hamilton. Jim Hamilton works as a therapist over at Kaiser. If you were to find a therapist, he would be optimum. Or if you were now in Denver and found your way to Haima, you would be much better off than you would, I think, with someone. But if the goal is to become psychologically healthy and free of those things that are constantly an issue and a confusion for you, I'm not sure it's necessary to have a therapist that is spiritually inclined. But as Liam pointed out, he is working with a meditation instructor that is also a psychotherapist. Bueno, you know, what a boon.
Brother Shankara, this is Michaeli Cachet.
Yes, Michaeli.
Hi. Isn't it an outside picture of an inward condition? Isn't that you're being your own therapist? Because you're stepping outside the dream and you're viewing, so you're having an outside picture. So it's showing you the inward condition. So that's where the baby steps come in, because you could say you're taking, at that point, the gradual process is you're taking Ramakrishna's hand because the fear, like a little child, is too much. So you say, please take my hand, or like a father where the child has a nightmare and he thinks there's boogeymen in his closet. So the father comes in, turns on the light gently, takes the child's hand and opens the closet gently and views that there's no boogeyman. So the psychology, since the majority of our psychology is based off the ego, as Sigmund Freud used to talk about the id and the different stages, I would say that it's an outside picture of an inward condition, and then you're actually being, along with your teacher, from coming from the reflection of the divine, you're viewing it and it's showing you what you're seeing inside. So it's a gradual process.
Yes, you're absolutely right. To do it on your own, however, it means developing that witness awareness, that witness personality. And this is why it's so good to have a therapist who is already they are the witness. They're trained to be the witness and hear and see you in a way that is masked from you. They're seeing more clearly what you are not seeing. If you, that's why I pointed out, if you want to do this on your own, if you have this deep-seated feeling that there's something wrong with having a therapist, then, and you're very sincere, then pursue Patanjali's Yoga Sutra. But do it starting with the yamas and niyamas. Because until you get that self-awareness of, oh, I am a thief, I am a liar, I am self-centered, which is what the practice of the yamas will teach you if you practice them. Because we're all thieves.
Well,
we're all liars. We're all self-centered. It is the product of our inborn ignorance.
Correct, because we're all here to learn because we're coming from the ego.
Yes, well,
or we think we.
The ego is absolutely necessary. People keep going around and around this, dancing around and around this idea that the ego needs to be done away with. Sri Ramakrishna said, no, 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 no. It just needs to become mature. It needs to become mature.
Correct, and it's a gentle process.
Right. And it must be a gentle process because otherwise there's too much pushback. Mm-hmm. What happens when you bully somebody? Either they'll push back or they'll retreat. Nothing productive is going to happen.
Correct.
So it has to be gentle.
Right, the dance continues with the bullying.
Oh, yes.
And it's not a
But
fun.
remember that a dance, most dancing requires two people. You can withdraw from that. I said earlier that there are as you progress in spiritual life, you find that the company you keep changes.
Correct.
Anything else, my dears?
I'd like to jump in and just give my 2 cents worth.
Please.
I thought it was a conversation about therapy and psychology and spiritual practice interesting because I've been doing both for many, many, many years. And just personally, from my limited experience, I feel like it's better to have a therapist who isn't a part of one of your circles.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, actually, most therapists I've ever talked to about this, therapists who are friends or just my own therapist, have said that there are rules against that. Like I've had therapists who say, I can't come to your music shows. Really, it's not, I can't, I'm either going to be your friend or I'm going to be your therapist, but I can't be both. And it's good to have that aside. I feel like it's more useful to have somebody who's just a really good therapist, be as objective as a human being can be, which is, limited. But somebody who is friendly toward whatever your spirituality or spiritual practice is, so that you feel comfortable talking about that as a big part of your life. But it doesn't have, a therapist doesn't have to be somebody who is involved in your spiritual practice as well.
I completely agree. And the thing about therapists is, you said, as objective as a human being can be. That's absolutely the case. A successful therapist is very highly trained, and their training continues. It isn't something that just stops. They don't come to a certification and that stops. No, their training continues so that they become more and more aware of their own limitations and overcome them. And so, yes, it's best not to have somebody who's too close to your spiritual circle. I agree entirely. So I withdraw what I said about Jim Hamilton, although I really...
Yeah, he would probably say no to anybody, because I know him, and he would probably say, he would refer you to somebody.
Yeah, but I do treasure his wisdom.
Yes.
I talk to him sometimes, and
yeah,
he has real insights.
He does. Yeah.
Anything else, my dears?
Yes, I just wanted to add something really quick to what Cindy just said. Yeah, so to expand on that, so the meditation teacher who was also a therapist, I actually only practice meditation with him. The person who I see for a therapist is not spiritually inclined, and I can say that it works very well. I'm not saying, I don't think there's any, for me, there isn't any set rule. I think, like you just said, is the person a good therapist, whether they're spiritually inclined or not spiritually inclined? I think that is what's key with therapy for me, right? And like, are they able to ask the hard questions that uncover whether they believe in, whether they're highly clinical? Because actually the therapist I see is very clinical. So like whenever I speak figuratively, she'll get kind of like, what do you mean? Like, like if I say something like a 7-day mental diet, she's like, well, that doesn't make sense because, you don't diet mentally. And so, she's very, very like literal. So very different from how I think, which I find very beneficial. And
yes.
And then the other thing I just wanted to add about, this kind of that disinclination towards therapy is something that we read on Tuesday about 256 of the Sri Sarada Devi book is, those who search for genuine monks get confused. They do not see their own imperfections. The master said, both good and bad qualities exist in human beings. Only God, the avatar, is free from blemishes. So that just kind of came to mind when you were sharing about that disinclination towards therapy and stuff.
Oh, this is why I say that book by Swami Brahmananda is so instructive. The first couple of sections are about how important it is to have a healthy, successful human ego, completely irrespective and of any spiritual aspect whatsoever. Just, I can cope with this world. I know how to deal with this world. And I have a realistic, clear view of who I am and what the world is and how the two interact. Then, he says, when you become really successful at that, a little quiet voice comes and says, well, there's another dimension to this. And anyway, I'll leave you to read the book if you're so inclined.
Brother Shankara?
Yes, dear.
Cindy was right, because I cannot do therapy for my family members. I always tell them to go to this and this because I'm too close, too subjective to them. I'm not
Right.
to. And the friends, I don't do it either, because if you know the friends, they are not going to be honest with me. Because
Yes.
I may slip, but I shouldn't. It's the HIPAA rules are there, whether you do it free or without, with payments, either way. But still, it's difficult to trust a friend to tell you confidential information. So it's better to go to somebody outsider. But if you
Yes.
don't know me personally, I'm here to help for
And
anybody.
that is bound by those privacy rules.
Exactly. Privacy rules is very, very important.
Yes.
I don't
You
know
have to be able to trust that that's going to be
exactly. If I
honored.
know you personally well, I'm here to help any of our congregation members. It's only a phone call. It's all teletherapy anyway nowadays. Nobody is going to therapist anymore. It's all telemental health.
Got it.
I am available free, no charge, no records. Anybody wants to use me, I'm here. So
Okay, dear.
not
Thank you.
too much, then I know it's difficult to feel comfortable. I truly understand that.
Okay.
So, okay, thank you, Brother Shankara.
Thank you, Irma. All right. Well, it looks like everybody's glad to be back because it's well after 12 o'clock and we're still having some fun here. So let's see if there's nothing more, then we'll wind it up. Om Sato Ma Satgamaya. Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya. Mrityorma Amrutangamaya. Aviravirmoiti. Oh, dearly beloved, lead us from your manifest truth to your absolute truth. Lead us from darkness and ignorance to the brilliance of thy wisdom and love. Lead us from darkness and ignorance to the brilliance of thy wisdom and love. Lead us from death to immortality. Light us through and through. Light us through and through with thy everlasting shining presence. Om Hari Om Tat Sat. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. And so because we can't go out in the parking lot and do it, we'll do it this way. Jai Shri Guru Maharaj Ji Ki Jai. Durga Durga Durga. Go in Mother's loving and protective embrace. May you be safe. May you be healthy. May you be cheerful.
Thank you, Brother Shankara.
All right, dears. Bye-bye, cats.
Take care. Thank you,
Bye-bye,
Brother Shankara.
Michaeli.
Right.
Bye-bye, all.
Bye, y'all.
Take care.
Yeah, indeed.